Okay, fantastic, everybody. Welcome, like I said. If you're looking for the topic seminar for the Calvin Coolidge Constitution Day Idaho Invitational Debate Tournament, then I'm pleased to say that you are in the right place. My name is Jared Rhodes. I'm the director of the Speech and Debate Program for the Calvin Coolidge Foundation. And I and my team welcome you to this call. And whether you are, as I mentioned, whether you are a student competitor or a coach or a parent or a judge, and we certainly look forward to meeting you all on Saturday, or in some cases sooner. And for instance, in the cases of some of the judges who will be getting together and meeting on Friday and doing some judge training on Friday night. So we look forward to seeing you either on Friday or Saturday, as the case may be. The Coolidge Foundation, just a little bit of overview here. The Coolidge Foundation we're a nonprofit based in Vermont with also an office in Washington, D.C. now. And the purpose of our organization is really to sort of share the legacy of President Coolidge and help him become better known, particularly to young people, and to promote the values that he embodied both in word and deed. And those values, we think of things like hard work and clear thinking and civility, a lot of things that kind of feed into debate and make it a natural fit that we have a speech and debate program. This is going to be the first debate tournament that the Coolidge Foundation has ever organized in the state of Idaho. And so we are really excited to be working with some new and amazing friends to make this happen. Students, we will introduce some of those people to you on Saturday at the tournament. We have some opportunities during the day, for instance, in our morning remarks and like before our award ceremony that day, where we'll have some moments where our co-organizers can speak and you can meet them. But we'll save those introductions for the appropriate time. One other thing, sort of in the housekeeping category, if you have any questions about specifically tournament mechanics, things like the format, the schedule, what time is lunch, are we power pairing, things like all of that kind of stuff, you'll probably find the answer on our webpage, and I'm actually going to post that in the chat right now. Okay, let me post some links here to post to everybody. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you can get that and refer to that. Those kinds of questions, you'll probably get the answer online. But if not, if you go looking and you still can't find the answer, absolutely feel free to email me. My email is there in that piece of text that I just posted into the chat. It's jrhodes@coolidgefoundation.org, but check that for the right spelling. I'm happy to answer all your questions, but I'd also sort of like to separate those kinds of questions from like pure topic questions, because the purpose of tonight is to focus on the topic itself. One of the things we always try to do with Coolidge Debate is not just put out a resolution and kind of cast you adrift to research it on your own. Although that said, independent research and writing is certainly a big part of competing in debate and something that we encourage and want you to be doing. But we also like the idea of bringing in a guest speaker and somebody who's a real subject matter expert to talk about the topic at hand. Sometimes, for our tournaments, this is a university professor. Sometimes it's an author. Maybe it's somebody from the think tank world. Or as is the case tonight, maybe it's somebody from the world of public service, an office holder or former office holder. Bringing in a speaker like this, we think kind of enables you to warm up a little bit to the topic and maybe learn more, maybe get some last minute clarification on something, or just get a different perspective and a deeper look at it. And it also gives you a chance to ask some burning questions if you have any, because those are always, we always include a Q&A section in these seminars. As you all know, the topic of Saturday's tournament is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And specifically, the resolution is resolved. Congress should repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And there's a lot to this. In short, it's the question of who's responsible for the speech that occurs online. So it's a speech, kind of a speech sort of related topic, and that harkens back to the Constitution Day theme and everything. So we think it's a good topic for this occasion. To get us acclimated to this issue tonight and in advance of our Saturday tournament, I'm happy to introduce a very special and couldn't be more appropriate guest speaker for our seminar, and that is Mr. Chris Cox. Mr. Cox he's got an undergraduate degree from the University of Southern California and degrees in business and law from Harvard. He was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for 17 years, from 1989 to 2005. He was representing California. He was appointed by President Bush as 28th chairman of the SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he served there from 2005 to 2009. And a couple more sort of especially noteworthy highlights from his career. He was an early China hawk, so kind of warning publicly that Chinese and American interests might come into conflict at some point. Many believe that China's supposed market liberalization might usher in a new era of democratic rights in China, sort of an optimistic view, but and that maybe that would lead to China becoming more like the U.S. in terms of political freedoms. But Congressman Cox kind of warned us early on that likely wouldn't be the case, and I'd say recent experiences have suggested that he was right on that. And then, but even more relevant to this issue, I would say, is that Mr. Cox is the co-author of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and so it's certainly a rare thing to be able to meet the leader responsible for the legislation that you are debating. So it seems like a really great opportunity. So with that, I urge you to listen closely to his presentation, and when we transition to Q&A, please unmute yourself. I'll sort of facilitate that a little bit. Put yourself on video, and we can ask some questions. So with that, I'll say, Chris, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Jared. This is a wonderfully interesting topic, and wholly apart from debate prep. I hope everybody online, parents, debaters, everyone else associated with Coolidge, might find it fun and interesting to learn a little bit more about the history of something that is very current. President Biden's been talking about it just in the last few days. It's very closely connected to the First Amendment. And later on, I hope in Q&A, we might dive into that a little bit, because I think a lot of people mistake what the First Amendment does for Section 230 and vice versa. But it's in any case very relevant to your daily life, because so much of the content that you create and consume on your phone or on your computer is directly related to what these days goes by the prosaic name of Section 230. The original name of the bill, by the way I introduced it, was the Internet Freedom and Family Empowerment Act. When it eventually became law, it was rolled into a much larger piece of legislation, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, big fat bill, hundreds of pages long. Nested within that bill, there was another bill called the Communications Decency Act. And after the entire Telecommunications Act was passed in Congress, the staff lawyers that are responsible for putting things where they belong in the United States Code, the whole collection of US laws, and assigned section numbers and so on, stuck my bill into the part that was titled the Communications Decency Act and numbered it consecutively after the last preceding section. So it became Section 230 instead of some more pleasant sounding name like the Freedom of Speech Act, or perhaps the Now I Don't Have to Hope They Publish My Letter to the Editor Act, or maybe even the Hot Damn Now I Can Become an Internet Personality Act. But we know it as Section 230. All of those names, by the way, I'm getting a little echo feedback here. Maybe somebody needs to mute. All of those names, I think, would be more descriptive than Section 230 is, which tells you nothing, because Section 230 has made it possible users of the internet to publish content that you create without protection from liability for the billions, and literally it is billions of pieces of user created content that are posted to millions of websites on the internet in real time every day. Nobody would want to take the risk of doing it. What prompted me in the first place to write this legislation was the difference between the internet, fundamental difference between the internet and radio and television and newspapers and books and magazines, that the laws were all written for before the internet arrived on the scene. Think about what print media and radio and TV all have in common. Every one of those things emanates from a single source, and it's published or broadcast to millions of passive consumers. They may be readers, viewers, or listeners. It's all the same. The publisher or the broadcaster is the content creator. The reader, the listener, or the viewer is the content consumer. And in all of those cases, it's a passive consumer. In the 1990s, the internet stood that model on its head. On the internet, now millions of individuals became the content creators, and they all converged on a single platform. So the old model of regulation didn't fit. In what I'll call the analog world before the internet, the legal rules were very simple to apply. The newspaper, the TV station, or the publishing house had complete control over whatever it chose to publish, so they could be held responsible for every word that they published. Those rules don't work when the publisher, the internet platform, does not control or has very imperfect control over what millions of content creators are themselves publishing in real time, 24/7. And so here I was one day on my regular weekly commute on a plane flight from California to Washington, the same flight I took every Sunday to return to work in Congress, reading an article in the Wall Street Journal about a court case in New York that had created a very dangerous legal precedent by applying the old rules to the new internet. I didn't know it at the time, but the facts of this case actually would someday be made into a movie. Some of you may have heard of the film, at least the older people online here will remember it. It was 9 years ago. It was a holiday blockbuster called The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if that rings a bell. It's based on a true story, as they say in Hollywood. It's the Hollywood version of a true story. If you haven't heard of this movie, I bet you have heard of the star, Leonardo DiCaprio. So in the movie, he plays a bad guy who in real life was named Jordan Belfort. This guy, Jordan Belfort, ran a New York stock brokerage that turned out to be a huge fraud. The brokerage firm was shut down by the authorities and he went to prison. But the real fraud, the real life fraud, had lasted for more than 7 years before he got caught. And it was during this time, before the fraud was exposed, that a whistleblower tried to raise the alarm. He did it on what was then the most popular online platform of the time, one that I used myself back in the 1990s, called Prodigy. The whistleblower published a post, and he called the Wall Street firm a cult of brokers who either lie for a living or get fired. Well, that, the Wolf of Wall Street said, it's not true, it's libel, and I'm going to sue. It turned out to be true, as the movie showed in Technicolor, but the public and law enforcement didn't know it yet. So the brokerage firm, which at the time was taking in about $13 billion a year in revenues, a big outfit, sued Prodigy, the online platform, for libel, defamation. The real life Wolf of Wall Street demanded hundreds of millions of dollars in damages from Prodigy simply because it hosted the allegedly libelous content on its platform. Prodigy argued it shouldn't be responsible for the content its users create because it hosted thousands of comments that were posted in real time, and Prodigy itself had no way of knowing whether the Wall Street firm was a fraud or not. And of course, Prodigy had never itself expressed an opinion on the subject. Well, the judge stuck to the old rules. The New York court ruled in favor of the Wolf of Wall Street, which exposed Prodigy to enormous liability. And here was the court's reasoning. Prodigy had made some efforts at content moderation. The platform had rules aimed at prohibiting online harassment. Prodigy prohibited swearing and bullying and grossly repugnant content. Those today we know as content moderation rules or terms of service. And that's what got it in trouble. If it had been an online space where anything goes, the judge said, then he would have treated it like a library, not a publisher, and it wouldn't have been liable for millions in damages. But instead, he threw the book at them. Now imagine if that were the law. We can all think of what the perverse incentives would be in the future if online platforms would expose themselves for all of the content on their platform for attempting to enforce some modest rules of the road. They would refuse to moderate even the most awful content for fear of that liability. Even minimal content moderation would make them legally responsible for everything that their users post, which they couldn't possibly keep up with. It was a prescription for turning every online platform that's hosting user-created content into a vulgar and dangerous place. So it was that court ruling in 1995 that kicked off a year-long effort among a bipartisan group of us in Congress. The first guy I recruited was my friend from Oregon, Ron Wyden, a liberal Democrat. I was a conservative Republican, but we had earlier decided we wanted to find some new areas that weren't well-worn partisan ruts where the Republicans already had their minds made up and the Democrats did. We wanted to find some cutting-edge issues in green fields, if you will, where we could think hard and then work with our colleagues both in the House and in the Senate to find the right answers. And it took us a year to do this, but it was really a quality effort, and it was I think very important because there were so many other issues connected with it, really inseparable from it, such as privacy and free speech and what to do about the dark side of cyberspace that we continue to wrestle with today. So the result of this collective year-long effort was what we now know as Section 230. It was signed into law in 1996, and it effectively overturned the result in the Wolf of Wall Street case by protecting good Samaritans who maintained rules of civility online the way Prodigy did. It did not eliminate legal liability for defamation or any other illegal content on the internet. Congress simply decided to place that legal liability on the people and the entities in the best position to prevent harm. That is, the people who create the content. In place of what would have been the rule if the New York decision had been allowed to stand, Congress recognized that it would be unreasonable for the law to require websites to read and understand and investigate everything posted online in real time. To make platforms liable for other people's content would mean that we would all lose the quintessential feature of the internet, which is its real-time communication capability among millions of people all around the world. All of the platforms would have to either stop publishing their users' contributions or let anything go, as the judge said, no matter how gross or how illegal. Or they might attempt to create around-the-clock legal and editorial review teams staffed with hundreds or thousands of people to attempt to continually monitor every message and every video and photo and blog before it was allowed to be posted online. If that didn't succeed, even with all the money and expense and time and delay in putting things online, they would face unlimited liability, just as if they had done it on purpose, just like Prodigy did. Not to mention that we would all lose access to things like Wikipedia. It's all user created, movie reviews or book reviews or restaurant reviews or the customer reviews of products that I think most of us like to rely on. Excuse me. I think also of those amazingly helpful how-to videos on YouTube. I think around the house here, we could never fix our garbage disposal or anything went wrong if we couldn't look it up on one of these videos. I'm so grateful for the people who take the time to, some of them are very professional, to put these instructions up for almost anything that we can imagine. But without Section 230, platforms would be unwilling to host it because they wouldn't have time to view it first. So that's sort of the lay of the land. I think we've gone on enough for questions. Obviously, I could talk about this endlessly, but you might want to drill down into certain areas. So let's do it that way.
All right, fantastic, and thank you, and yes, amen to those videos. Right, I've been putting up a shed, and I had no idea how to do an anchor bolt properly, and now I do, thanks to those kinds of videos and many others. So yeah, so let's transition to some Q&A here. Students, judges, coaches, anybody who's online, please feel free. You can either unmute yourself and just jump right in, or if you want to use the raise your hand feature, whatever you're comfortable with, I can probably adapt to. I might take the first, let you guys think of some good questions. Might take the first one here and ask you, Chris, what do you think? What do you think about the idea that, hey, you could have a Wild West in the early days because content management was not feasible. But hey, nowadays we've got AI and sophisticated algorithms, and maybe content management, moderation can be done now. Does that change? Are we in a different time? Do we have a different set of tools than we did in 1996? That means that we should revisit this or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. Life has progressed nowhere more than in the tech world from the mid 1990s until here we are now in the third decade of the 21st century. Two things have happened in parallel. One is that we've developed artificial intelligence and algorithmic analytic tools and so on that can be very helpful in content moderation. The other is that the scale of these platforms has grown exponentially. So back in the 1990s, when we were worried that the platforms couldn't keep up with the volume of content when it was in the millions, usually the low millions, today it is, even for medium-sized platforms, in the hundreds of millions and likely billions, over the course of a week or a month or what have you. We have to remember that Section 230 covers all online platforms. It's not just about the big ones. It's all of them, and none of them could operate without these legal protections, I think, when there is so much to keep up with. The other thing about AI and algorithms and analytical tools that are pre-written into code is that they make mistakes. And some of those mistakes can be very costly. We've had some recent experience with that when we have tried to carve out of Section 230 liability for sex crimes of various types. And it turns out that when you use these algorithmic tools and so on, technology basically instead of humans, in order to do it at scale, that there are a lot of false positives. You end up kicking a lot of stuff off the internet that people need, health information and so on. So yes, the tech tools are helpful, but what they help is content moderation, which is always going to need adult human supervision. That's particularly true when it comes to harassment, bullying, hate stuff, racism, and so on, because idiom matters, the way people speak matters. A lot of these big companies have tried to offshore their content moderation, still using humans, but they send it, let's say, to India, where yes, they speak English, but the idioms aren't exactly the same, and they make a lot of mistakes for that reason. They miss a lot of things. So I think the law has to make allowance for trying very hard, but nonetheless failing. That's the Good Samaritan piece. That's what Section 230 is all about.
Good. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's. We have a couple of questions. The account that's 1317, etc. You want to unmute yourself?
Was it 13170130084?
That's you.
Okay, thank you so much. First, thank you both for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to be participating in this tournament. My question to you, Mr. Cox, was if someone were to ask you how to measure good faith, how would you respond?
So good faith, this is somebody who has studied up, you've read the statute. Those words appear in Section 230. And content moderation efforts need to be in good faith. So if you're operating under that portion of the statute and your protection comes from the fact that you were making the attempt to have content moderation rules in place, but something got through, you should be able to rely on this good faith part of the statute. What that means is that there is an objective measure. We can go in and see, have you got policies and procedures in place, or are you just pretending? Has there been a real effort made? I think rarely would it be the case that those words would have application to the facts in an individual case, although you can certainly, as a law school professor, you can imagine it. I can easily, state a hypothetical where somebody is out to deliberately harm an individual and so on. But in the main, what the statute is after is ensuring that there are these policies and procedures in place, that there really are rules of the road, that they are intended to protect the user community, and so on.
All right. Thank you. Next up, we'll do Creed Jones and then Elvis. Creed Jones.
Awesome. Give me one. Perfect. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. Let me see if I can try to, I don't know if my cameras can work, but I'll just start the question. There we go. Okay. I first just want to thank everyone. I think this is an awesome foundation and I'm so excited for this weekend. And then towards you, Mr. Cox, I just want to talk a little bit about author's intent. So when writing this act, I was wondering if it was intended to be revised and changed as social media and I guess the internet changed, or if it was intended just to be this document that was in a way concrete and that just never changed and we always referred to it.
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think I have a fairly straightforward answer. My own approach to writing legislation was always to stay far away from technical terms and rather to write laws that state principles that can be applied, for, if not forever, then for a reasonably indefinite period of time. And here's why. It takes a long time to get a law passed in Congress, a good one or a bad one. It has to go through quite a lot of process. The world changes much more quickly than that process can keep up with. So if you write a law, and let's say that you write a law and it says, you have to use a 2400 baud modem to make sure that you're able to catch this stuff in real time, which would have been state of the art back then. Then in order to comply with the law, the lawyers would say, well, I know you've got a better thing that you could be using, but the law says this, and if you use the other thing, I'm not sure whether a judge isn't going to say, I don't know the difference between that and the 2400 baud modem, but I know you didn't use one, and so I'm going to say you're not in compliance. So writing tech standards into the law, I think, is a very bad thing, and rather you should write laws that are somewhat let's say, agnostic about what the technology might be. If people come up with a better mousetrap, that's really good. The law should not prevent that.
All right, great. Elvis, you had a question, and then we'll do Bruce and then Macy Dean.
Hi, I don't think I actually know anyone here. But this is a cool opportunity, and I'm very excited for this. My question to you, Chris Cox, was I was wondering, what do you think the future would look like concerning things like Section 230? What do you think the future with the internet would look like in your opinion?
What it would look like if there were a change or if it stays the same?
If it changes or it stays the same, both, basically.
Well, if it were repealed, so this is I'm a little bit wary of saying what I'm about to say, because the debate question that's going to have, I think, roughly half of you on one side and half on the other, is, should it be repealed? And if I say, it ought to be repealed or it ought not to be repealed, then I don't want to poison the well for anybody. But to help people who are making the case for repeal, at least think about where the vulnerabilities might be in their argument. Let me explain my perspective. Without Section 230 at all, then it's pretty easy to imagine what happens. You go back to the status quo ante, the way the law was before Section 230. And in that situation, it was possible for people to get sued, and sued for a lot of money if anything slipped through the cracks that users created and that they posted on their platforms. So platforms would have to respond to that. These would be risks that would be nearly impossible, probably totally impossible to insure against. And one case, because the Wolf of Wall Street case that I described to you was just one case, could wreck the company. Even if you're a giant company, 2 or 3 cases at hundreds of millions of dollars each, I mean, that adds up pretty quickly. And there are an awful lot of people that would want to go after the deep pockets of the biggest platforms and so on. So it would be, quite the magnet for litigation. The best way, if I'm a director of one of those companies, I'm going to be interested in risk management. I want to say, what are we doing to make sure we're not needlessly exposed to this? And one of the answers to that question almost surely would be purging all of the user-created content that we can't monetize. Having people on our platform isn't going to do it anymore. We're going to want to make sure that the amount of money that people are paying us to be on our platform exceeds the discounted risk that we are taking on by going naked, without Section 230. So that's what I think would happen. If we keep Section 230, we still have all the problems that we know about on the internet right now. And so we are still going to need to find better ways, including better technological ways, to deal with the worst parts of the internet that a lot of both users and platforms don't want to have any association with. And I should mention advertisers. One of the reasons that a lot of platforms can provide users the opportunity to publish their content for free is that advertisers are paying the freight. And when you're on that platform, you might be seeing some ads over in the margin, or they might flash in front of you for a few seconds before you move on to watch a video. Advertisers do not want their products alongside images or content that is not helpful for their brand. And so that's another influence. And all of these influences together, I think, if we are concentrated on solving the same problem, might be able to harness technology, including AI as it improves, to make life better. And they'd be willing to do that because, if they miss, if something gets through and it's embarrassing or worse for the company, it's not the end of the company. Their liability is not unlimited. They won't have thousands of such lawsuits.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify and reiterate, all of our students will be debating both sides on Saturday, so they'll have to do the affirmative twice, and then and the negative twice, maybe alternating back and forth. So they are prepping both sides, which is fun to think about.
Well,
Bruce,
if I might, if
oh,
I
go
might
ahead.
just take the opportunity then to, I'm happy to hear that. That makes it a lot of fun, I would think. And you get a lot more mileage out of your debate prep because you get to do it twice both ways. If I were given this assignment to argue against the position I actually hold, then I would make the very best case for a world in which there's not instantaneous communication. We had a very fine world before the internet. People couldn't communicate instantly. They did it mostly point to point. They picked up the phone, they called people, and then life was swell. So maybe all this modern stuff is unnecessary. And maybe it comes with too many hazards and risks and real world harm to people's reputations and on and on, that we should say, on balance, we're just not going to do it. And we're going to, I don't want to say we'll be Luddites because there's still a lot technology can do for us. But when it comes to user created content, we're just not going to have it that way anymore.
Oh, that'd be an interesting approach. Yeah. All right. Bruce, I think you had a question, and we're going to go Macy Dean. Might go Sydney after that, because Creed Jones has already asked one.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for being with us and sharing your knowledge on the subject. By the way, I'm an emeritus faculty member at Antonin Scalia Law School. I'm sure you know many of my colleagues.
Oh, yes.
I'm enjoying retirement here in Idaho, however. My question goes to what I think is the white elephant the elephant in the room, which is the use of social media for political censorship, right? And so let me just pose things the following way. Suppose the CEO of a prominent social media firm publishes himself on his platform that Bruce Johnson robbed the First National Bank. Now, clearly he's liable for defamation, if I could make that case. Well, then suppose somebody posts on his website, Bruce Johnson robbed the First National Bank, and he censors either myself or someone who comes to my defense to say, no, Bruce was at my house when the First National Bank was robbed. Why isn't that speech by the platform itself and actionable speech? And so beyond that, I'm just wondering if you envisioned when you fought for Section 230 that it could be used as a shield for this kind of thing.
Yeah, so good question. I'm not surprised. And good for all the people that are going to be debating this to think about these things. So you've given me an entree to talk about something I just foreshadowed in the opening, and that was the First Amendment. The First Amendment, if we take 230 away, so let's just imagine 230 is gone. The First Amendment gives every private platform the right to say whatever it wishes on its platform, because it is not the government. The First Amendment protects all of us citizens and private actors from state action. So the platform without Section 230 has every right to say whatever it wants. And if those things turn out to be defamatory, they're going to be liable. You're with me so far? You were shaking your head.
Well, my understanding is that I know if the New York Times publishes something that is not only false, but they can the defendant or the plaintiff can prove malice, that the New York Times can be held liable. Now, maybe it's a different situation for
No, I think it's exactly the same situation. What I'm saying is that you would be able to sue the platform for defamation, and on the facts that you gave, win.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So that's the state of play if there's no
Okay.
Section 230 at all.
Okay.
The First Amendment gives the platform the right to say whatever it wants in the first instance, except in extremely rare cases, as you know, where you could have a prior restraint on speech. And then after that, they become liable for their own speech.
Okay.
So the way that Section 230 is constructed, there is an exception that is oftentimes overlooked, even occasionally by judges, to the protections from liability when it is the platform's own speech.
Right.
You are only protected from the speech of someone else. So in the fact pattern that you just described, it would strike me as quite a stretch for the platform to be able to say, we have terms of service that say that when we feel like it, we can stop somebody from coming to somebody's defense in a factual way in a lawsuit. That's their speech. I mean, maybe they could attempt to write a neutral rule that, and then maybe they would be able to act in good faith. When I said earlier in response to an excellent question that it would be rare that bad faith would be able to be shown on the facts, I think you just described a nice hypothetical where bad faith would be shown on those facts. And so that's another reason that Section 230 wouldn't protect the platform. In that
Okay.
case.
Great. Okay. Let's we have 3 hands up. We can probably get through these. I would think. Macy Dean.
Sorry, one second.
There we go.
Hi. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thank you. I think this is an incredible event and I'm excited to participate. What would be a way to hold these social media platforms accountable for cyberbullying and the users of it accountable?
Yeah. So one of the things that hasn't come up explicitly tonight, but that is another very relevant point is this user accountability piece that you mentioned. If users are anonymous, that was the situation in the Prodigy case. And as I look over a quarter century of case law, the most egregious examples of bad results, unjust results, are in those cases where you can't even find out who done it. And so you want to go after somebody, and the platform, at least you know who that is. So then we want to sue the platform for all the reasons that we've discussed. I don't think that's the right answer either. But I think one thing that platforms might do to protect themselves in a world where there is some liability is say that we got to know who you are, because we're going to come after you as a platform. We're going to counterclaim every time somebody sues us because you're the one who did it. It was your content, and we're not going to let you hide behind anonymity. So that's one piece that I think has to be explored. It's not as easy an answer as I've just made it sound, however, because anonymity has a great history in our country. And there's been a book that's been recently published by Jeff Kosseff, who has done a good job of marshaling a lot of the legal history on this subject. But if you just think back from what you know from your classes and so on about the history of politics in England, for example, people like Jonathan Swift and so on, who have made important political criticisms because they were able to be anonymous. In our own country, Ben Franklin, who once owned slaves, became an abolitionist. He became president of the nation's first abolition society in Philadelphia. But when he first started writing about this, he did it anonymously. So getting rid of anonymity, which the People's Republic of China would love to do and is able to do with their technology, means that you're getting rid of a lot of important speech. So it's not as easy as I just made it sound with my description. But I do think that there is some space in there for companies to think about, how they might have in reserve the ability to go after everybody and not allow people, to make everybody give a credit card, let's say, so we know who you are when we find you.
Yeah, good. Cindy, your question?
Perfect. Okay, so just speaking in generals here, I think sometimes there can be a broad assumption made by the public that because government doesn't have any, they're not holding these companies responsible, actions such as like drug dealing, sex trafficking, all of these things happening kind of on the darker side of the web aren't being cracked down on at the same level. So how would you say that, I guess, this act negatively affects the government legitimacy that we have? Or I don't know, like how does the lack of enforcement by the government on these companies affect the perception of the government that society in general holds, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, I think, there are a lot of black eyes to go around whenever there is a bad result. There are all kinds of harm that we're aware of that can occur on the internet. Sometimes suicides. We have people, dealing in illegal drugs that can kill people. The list is endless. And so none of that reflects well on anybody anywhere near these issues. Least of all, obviously, the people directly responsible for it. So I think all of that has to be taken into account. I think the government, can't say that because there are bad things happening, we have to come in ham-fistedly and stop all of it no matter what, because there will surely be criticism coming back at them when they're, strangling free speech, let's say. If they use the government to tell people what they can and can't say in ways that, get a whole lot of the population riled up. Or if they make a mistake, and as I was mentioning earlier, they have rules that, make a lot of content that would be life-saving go away, and so on. So I think your question's a good one. It's always there in the background that when the government should not be seen to be asleep at the switch. They can't be not paying attention to this. I do think that everybody is paying attention. The current problem in Congress is that what people want to do seems to be so widely divergent. You have people over on one side, people on the other side. When it comes to political speech on the internet, the solutions are exactly opposite, and so they can't do anything. I think that's just another way to look bad.
Okay, and creedjones, do you have a second question?
Yes. Okay. So my second question just was a little bit more about the lawsuits that we previously talked about. So Mr. Cox, I was wondering if you would think yes or no if there was less legal immunity, I guess, or there was more room for lawsuits to happen if these platforms would have a greater incentive to put more resources into moderation. And then also with these lawsuits, if the money that is being used in these lawsuits is being distributed into is helping stop this the accumulation of wealth, or if you would say these lawsuits and the money being lost from these billion-dollar companies isn't really creating an economic impact to the average middle class individual.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the universe of it. So repealing Section 230 is what we're talking about in debate, and there are over 200 million websites that are covered by Section 230 in the United States. It's very few of them are Facebook and Twitter and Google and so on. So the legal question here is not strictly about billion-dollar companies by any means. So having said that, let's talk about only the biggest of the big companies and ask what they would do. In litigation, they are attractive targets because they have what plaintiffs' lawyers like to call deep pockets. And so they can expect to get sued if they have more liability. They will be sued. And then they just make a calculation of whether the way they are doing business is worth the legal exposure that they have. I think that the way the internet has been going, this is just a little business observation. Companies like Disney and so on that have a lot of content of their own, want to get more and more involved online. Disney, for a while thought about buying Twitter. But there is this sort of magnetic attraction of professionally created content to the internet. The individually created content, the stuff you and I might post on the internet, that's not such a big moneymaker for these people. They get some eyeballs and some ads, but I think that it's entirely likely that to the extent possible, they would simply say it's not worth it. And so, yes, to answer your question, they would change behavior, but not necessarily in a way we would like or maybe intend, because they would take away the part that we like in self-preservation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting to think through some of these counterfactuals here. I think our last question of the evening is going to come from my Coolidge Foundation colleague here, Matt Denhart, esteemed colleague. Matt, what's your question?
Thank you. What a fabulous presentation and great questions from the students too. This should be a great debate on Saturday. So good luck to everybody. Chris, my question relates to, I guess, antitrust, but also as that relates to censorship. It seems like, I guess, primarily on the left, the criticism of the tech giants, if you will, is that their moderation is sort of unfair. They get to decide what's misinformation or what's harmful, and that may be, or perhaps is sometimes politically motivated, or could be. On the right, it's that when they do moderate, they, in the most extreme case, deplatform someone, such as the former president of the United States, taking away that person's voice. And if their platforms become so large that then they remove the ability of a public figure to communicate on that platform, which has become a very important space for political speech, therefore that is, in violation of some kind of First Amendment rights that person would have. Anyway, what thoughts? I realize this is kind of a broad question, but it gets into antitrust, and should we break them up? Should there be more competition? Anyway, any thoughts you have might be useful to the students.
Yeah. So let me take it in two steps. Antitrust second. We'll do 230 first. So I am a political conservative. What Republican means these days, who knows? But I've been out of Congress for a long time, so I don't necessarily identify with everybody the way they line up in Congress these days. But I understand why conservatives are unhappy that there's political bias, because there is. There's political bias all over the media. There was when I was in Congress. One doesn't need to be a PhD in political science to recognize that legacy media, you mentioned the New York Times, are hostile to conservative principles of free enterprise, lower taxes, moderate regulation, and so forth. That bias can bleed through to search results because these are big brand names, the very biggest brand names, all the networks and all the most famous newspapers and so on. So there has been and by the way, this is not something that started when I was in Congress. You go back to the 19th century, you take a look at early 20th century, mid 20th century. This is life. It's what happens when you have a free press. And that's the First Amendment piece. Private parties get to say what they want. And the First Amendment says, it's worth remembering, Congress shall make no law. No, it's just that straightforward and that blunt. Congress shall make no law. So we are stuck with that, right? Political bias, there it is. Deal with it. Take 230 away, as I was mentioning before, and the platforms, just like CNN, just like NBC News, just like the New York Times, get to have their political bias, and they get to keep exercising it. 230 is not the source of their power to do that. What 230 is the source of is their tolerance for publishing what I write, which they never did tolerate before the internet. I would have to write a letter to the editor. They'd look at it and they'd say, we don't want to publish what Cox has to say. We only have this much space, and we like these other things better. But so I would say from a conservative standpoint that even with the bias, we're a hell of a lot better off than we ever were before, because now people do read what we write. Maybe not everywhere at all times in the way we would like. But even the Hunter Biden story, which was, somewhat of an egregious content moderation mistake, everybody knew about it. They just didn't know about it through the channels that they wished. But, the New York Post got a hell of a lot of publicity for itself. Oh, and I've been to antitrust. I'm sorry. We got the second half of your question. So antitrust is always there for good reasons. If somebody is a monopolist and they are dealing unfairly and consumers are harmed, then antitrust laws are a very good tool. I would say that just being big, particularly in the tech business, shouldn't be enough. When I was just out of law school, I was a law clerk on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I spent the better part of a year working on a big antitrust case against IBM. And everybody was quite certain that IBM was going to strangle the world, and nobody would ever be able to make computers except for IBM. And we know that was not true. You all remember, I think it was the cover of Newsweek or Time or both, MySpace, being the giant and so on. Maybe you don't even remember the name MySpace anymore, but it was Facebook in its time. With tech, disruption is the name of the game. The market does seem to work. Antitrust is meant for market failures, but there seems to be a very, very active market in technology, and disruption can happen to anybody, anytime. If you're a tech CEO, every night you go to bed wondering, when I wake up in the morning, is everything going to be different? So it might be that the marketplace works a lot faster than antitrust can. When you break up big companies like Ma Bell, AT&T, the judges had to oversee that for years and years and years. It lasted forever. It's not nearly as quick as the marketplace can be. So not to say that antitrust laws shouldn't ever be applied, they ought to. Particularly if you meet all those criteria, you've got monopoly power, you are abusing it, and you are harming consumers, then I'm all for it. Rewriting the antitrust laws, sort of reverse engineering them, so that you don't have to meet those criteria anymore, and you just do away with your enemies. I'm not so sure that's a good idea.
All right, well, fantastic. That brings us to the hour here. So I think with that, we should wrap up. Chris, thank you again so much for your time. I think we got through a lot of great questions, and I hope everybody, like I said, is kind of warmed up and primed for Saturday. It should be a great tournament. And once again, if anybody has questions for me, on tournament mechanics, of course, here I'll put my info and links in the chat once more. Feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I'll say good night, everybody. Thank you. This has been recorded, so we'll post the recording. Thanks again.
Bye now.